Yes.
Okay. Let me just introduce Professor Kaura. I wanted to also ask you, is it okay if we record this? This
Oh,
talk has
yes.
been recorded.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Thank you so much. And I request everyone to again switch off their microphones and please type questions in the chat box only. So, to introduce Professor Gora, he is very well known in the NMR community and also in the NMR community in India. He is currently positioned at the University of Washington, Seattle. He was introduced to the field of NMR at the Indian Institute of Science, uh, which is formerly known as SIF, but now the NMR Research Center. He is currently working as a research associate professor at Mitochondria and Metabolism Center in the Department of Anesthesiology and Pain Medicine. He is also Associate Director for the Northwest Metabolomics Research Center at the University of Washington. He works in the area of NMR-based metabolomics, focusing method developments and applications to biomedicine. He has almost 200 publications, including chapters in books, and a book on NMR-based metabolomics. He is an elected fellow from the National Academy of Sciences, India, and the first recipient of Professor S. Subramaniam Award from the NMR Society of India. Professor Gora, you can start now. You have 30 minutes.
Share scheme participant can share at a time. I'm trying to share my screen. It says one participant
Yes,
can
please.
share at a time. Advanced sharing options.
Wait a minute.
Okay. Can you?
You are the co-host. You can certainly share.
So right now,
Can
no
you?
one else is sharing, so you should be able to share.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. I think it's coming. Yes, you can see your screen.
Oh, you can.
You can start the slide mode of the PowerPoint. Yes. Yeah, very good.
Okay. Uh, Thank you, Ranveer Das, for your kind introduction. Um, Thank you, Suryaprakash and team Jeet, Vivek, for organizing this webinar series. And I also thank you for inviting me to make a presentation here. Through your repeated reminders, you made sure that I do not oversleep and then, make this presentation. So I had to come to my office, and although internet speed was high at home, I did not want to take a chance. So I just came to office and then making this presentation. So at the outset, I'd like to reminisce the last conversation between Atreya and me. It's about a month ago before he departed to his heavenly abode. His question to me was, do you know if there is any society exclusively for magnetic resonance in metabolomics? If not, why not we start one international society? We can take ideas from NMRS. Let me know what you think. Will Daniel Rafter be interested in this? I can prepare a draft of what will be scope and activities of this society and send to you and Daniel if you think this is interesting. So this is a question from Atreya. It's on June 4th, 2020 at 8:27 a.m. Indian time. So this message, a big idea from Atreya, came to me as a big surprise. The immediate thing that occurred to me was about his bubbling energy and enthusiasm about science and scientific activities. I believe his energy and enthusiasm will inspire, especially the younger scientists, to set harder goals and then strive hard to achieve it. So Moving on to my presentation, the title is NMR-based metabolomics of cellular energetics. A bit of introduction on metabolomics. Metabolomics is about analysis of small molecules which provide information on action, inaction, or overaction of upstream molecular species, such as genes, mRNA, and then enzymes in health and diseases. The biological samples that are used, or it doesn't have to be biological samples, they can come from human population or cell lines or animal models or even plant, food, or environment. But for biomedical application, it's mostly human samples or samples from animal models or cell lines. Major steps involved in the metabolomic studies are detection of metabolites, identification, and then quantitation using analytical methods.
Online class apa?
And then determine the concentrations of metabolites. So the metabolites concentrations thus derived are used to identify biomarkers for diseases, making use of statistical methods, or another direction is to use the metabolites concentrations to map altered metabolic pathway focused on identifying drug targets. The two most widely used analytical methods in metabolomics are NMR spectroscopy, and then the other one is mass spectrometry. Mass spectrometry is a highly sensitive method. Several hundreds to thousands of metabolites are routinely analyzed using mass spectrometry, but it has its own disadvantages, particularly challenge to get reproducible results, and then challenge to get absolute concentrations. NMR spectroscopy, although it is less sensitive than MS, it has unique characteristics for metabolomics applications, especially it's highly reproducible, and you can identify compounds that are not known, determine absolute concentrations of metabolites, and then another important characteristic is you can measure real-time metabolism of live biological systems. This is a typical high-resolution NMR spectrum of a human blood extract. Advances in NMR methodology enable detection of more and more number of metabolites. Then the question comes, what are these, for the same biological samples, you start seeing more and more peaks depending on the methods, technology that you use. The question is, what are these more and more metabolites? In fact, one of the major challenges in metabolomics field is to know the identity of the unknown compounds. One focus of our research is to identify unknown metabolites and develop methods for their analysis on routine basis for metabolomic applications. For example, these are different parts of a single high-resolution NMR spectrum of blood. Our work in the last few years has enabled identification of virtually every peak in the NMR spectrum. About 80 metabolites have been identified and then quantified in human blood. Greater than 35% of the metabolites thus identified were new. This is the highest number of metabolites that can be identified and quantified in human blood using 1D NMR spectroscopy so far. But the challenge comes when unstable metabolites needs to be analyzed, particularly these metabolites of cellular energetics. Coenzyme A, acetyl coenzyme A, redox coenzymes, energy coenzymes, antioxidants, they are fundamental to the cellular functions. The food that we eat gets converted into energy currency in the form of ATP through citric acid cycle inside mitochondria. And then this energy is used for vital body functions. If you take a look a little bit closer, the coenzyme NADH is one of the major products of citric acid cycle. In mitochondrial respiration, NADH oxidizes to NAD through electron transport chain, and it releases a hydrogen ion. This hydrogen ion gets into the intermembrane space through electron transport chain, and then it is used to drive a protein called ATP synthase, generating ATP through oxidative phosphorylation. So we call it oxidative phosphorylation because its oxygen is involved in this mitochondrial respiration. In fact, oxygen from that we breathe in all the time, non-stop, as long as we are alive, is used here as a substrate to generate ATP energy. In fact, you'll be surprised to know that the amount of ATP thus produced and consumed in one day in the human body is equal to the weight of the human body itself. So you can imagine how important functions of these coenzymes in cellular functions. As we age, NAD level declines substantially, which leaves us at a greater risk for a multitude of diseases. To address this challenge, currently there are numerous human clinical trials are going on, focused on boosting NAD levels in the blood using nutritional supplementation. In fact, we ourselves are associated in one such study where a nicotinamide riboside, which is a precursor to NAD synthesis, was given to humans, and then NAD level was monitored in the blood. So this shows the nicotinamide riboside increasing in blood and then decreasing in few hours after ingestion. So simultaneously, you can see the NAD level going up in the blood. So this shows comparison between baseline and then steady state NAD level in the blood. This is for 8 different individual. The whole study was focused on pharmacokinetics of nicotinamide riboside and its action on the NAD synthesis. Despite importance of these coenzymes, currently there is no simple method for analysis of these metabolites of energetics. Conventional method currently used is enzymatic assay, which needs a separate protocol for analysis of the enzymes. That means individually every time you have to use a different protocol to measure these coenzymes one by one. So the challenge with this is there is an interference from sample matrix leads to inaccurate results, and then linear range of detection, which is finite, which causes a problem. So because of all these reasons, this method leads to errors which often outweigh biological variations. Mass spectrometry is one promising method, but its problem is ion suppression, which is a well-known problem in this analytical method. The other problem is interference due to unit mass difference. This is particularly for these molecules. For example, NAD, NADH, they differ by only one mass unit. Similarly, NADP, NADPH, they differ by only one mass unit. So if you try to detect one, so other one interference. So this causes inaccurate results in their analysis. So other important issue is in-source fragmentation of the metabolites. That means the breaking up of the metabolites inside the mass spectrometer even before you detect them. For example, ATP can break here, or it can break here, giving rise to ADP and AMP, causing inaccurate ATP determination. Similarly, ADP can break here, causing producing AMP, so causing inaccurate ADP results in mass spectrometry analysis. So AMP that you analyze, it has the contribution from the biological AMP plus the decomposed or degraded ATP and ADP inside the mass spectrometer. So even a bigger challenge, which is unconnected with any analytical method, is the notoriously unstable nature of these molecules because of enzyme activity and then oxidation. So they're extremely sensitive to sample harvesting condition, extraction condition, and then even measurement conditions. Um, for example, these are different spectra from the same tissue obtained using different harvesting conditions. So depending on the conditions that you use, most of ATP is lost or NADH, NADPH completely disappear. Uh, so this is another example. You will be surprised to know that NADH cannot be detected in frozen blood. It actually oxidizes to NAD. Um, Frozen in metabolomics, the samples are kept frozen until they are analyzed. So freezing at -80 is a routinely used phenomenon. But if you use frozen blood, you will miss the metabolites, the important metabolites of energetics, that is NADH. So this is an overlay of six parts of six blood spectra. 3 are obtained using fresh blood. The other 3 are obtained using frozen blood. You can see that the effect of freezing is not much for NADP, whereas for NAD, the frozen blood, you see increased NAD at the cost of NADH. That means NADH oxidizes to NAD, giving rise to higher NAD level. But you cannot detect NADH if you use frozen blood. So regarding extraction method, sensitivity of these coenzymes to extraction. So what you see here is 2 spectra from the same pool of blood. The bottom, the blue one, was obtained based on method development using NMR spectroscopy. The top one, the red one, is obtained for the same tissue based on the method development using mass spectrometry analysis. This is what you see here is for tissue NMR spectra. But the bottom one again is the protocol was optimized based on NMR spectroscopy detection. And the top one was obtained based on mass spectrometry based detection. And it was published very recently in a very good journal. So the point, what is disturbing here and surprising here is that the people who use mass spectrometry-based protocol are unaware that most of the metabolites that they are trying to detect are already destroyed even before detection. The point to be emphasized here is that NMR spectroscopy, unlike mass spectrometry, captures the sensitivity of these coenzymes due to sample treatment. And hence it is superior for method development for analysis of particularly such unstable compounds. So even this, how you dry the sample after extraction of the metabolites affects the sensitivity of these compounds. So what you see here is 6 parts of 6 spectra of human blood. Bottom 3 were obtained by drying the extracted sample using vacufuge method. That's the conventionally used method. The top 3 are obtained using drying the sample using nitrogen gas. So in the sample that were dried using vacufuge drying, you can see the appearance of nicotinamide at the cost of NAD. That means portion of NAD is destroyed if you use vacufuge drying of the samples. So even how you analyze the sample matters, affects the stability of these coenzymes. That means the dissolved oxygen present in the solution affects the stability of the coenzymes. The bottom traces in all these spectra are obtained immediately after making the solutions. The top ones are obtained 24 hours for the same solutions, 24 hours after making the solutions. On the left, you see that after 24 hours, about 50% of NADH and NADPH are lost due to oxidation because oxygen present in the solution. If you remove the oxygen in the solution, degassing using an inert gas such as helium, you can retain the integrity of these coenzymes. So in the case of coenzyme A, about 80% of it is lost in 24 hours. I mean, it oxidizes to glutathione coenzyme A disulfide. Uh, it's a glutathione. It forms this compound because glutathione is present in much higher concentration compared to coenzyme A. So again, if you remove the gas, degas the sample using inert gas, so you can halt oxidation of coenzyme A. So in the last few years, we have addressed several factors that affect the stability of these metabolites of cellular energetics. So using these optimized protocols, we have detected and identified redox and energy coenzymes. And more recently, we have identified reduced and oxidized glutathione, and then acetyl coenzyme A, and also coenzyme A glutathione disulfide. This was never detected, identified before um, uh, 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 by NMR in the tissue. This molecule is known as intramitochondrial stress indicator. So all these, most of these metabolites of energetics, cellular energetics, were identified for the first time by NMR, and then all these can now be quantified simultaneously, apart from a vast number of other metabolites in various biological samples. In fact, you can detect these coenzymes in all types of tissues. So if you expand this region, so you will get the isolated peaks of redox and energy coenzymes, and this region is enough for quantification of these coenzymes. In biological interpretation, its redox ratios are used because their NAD, NADH, NADP, NADPH ratios represent redox state of the cells. So in NMR detection, the ratio of peaks represents the ratio of these coenzymes, because each of these peaks come from one hydrogen atom. So you can just directly, by visualizing the NMR spectra or just measuring the peak intensity, you can get to know the ratios of these coenzymes without resorting to any other calculations. We did test to test the sensitivity of the coenzymes to genetic alterations. In this particular case, the mice were knocked out. The NDFS4 gene was knocked out. This gene is responsible for the functioning of complex 1. It's NDFS4 protein. The complex 1 is the first complex in the mitochondrial respiration chain which produces energy. There are actually 5 complexes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 5th one is the last one, which produces is ATP synthase, which produces ATP. So if in this knocked out gene, because end of the complex 1 is not functioning, so NADH, it is responsible for the oxidation of NADH to NAD and then releasing hydrogen in the electron transport chain. So because of this, NADH starts accumulating. So it increases in concentration, or NADH to NAD ratio increases. So when you did the NMR experiments for these wild type and then genetically altered mice, so the bottom one is the bottom spectrum shows for the wild types. That means gene is not knocked out. So they are normal mouse. And the top one shows the NMR spectrum for the gene knocked out, NDFS4 gene knocked out mouse. So you can see that increased NADH concentration without altering the total NADH and the NAD pool because of this. This is another test. In this particular case, there is a overexpression of NAD pool. the gene NAMPT is responsible for overexpression of, this is a transgenic mice. So because of this, NADH pool increases. So these are the results that we see by NMR. The bottom one is again from the wild type mice. That means gene is not altered. And the top spectrum is for the NAMPT transgenic mice. So what happens is the pool size increases without altering the NAD to NADH ratio. So the third test is for the mice with both. One is transgenic, another one is knockout. So both were present in a single mouse. So because of gene knockout, so you expect NADH to NAD ratio increase. That means because there is no action of the complex 1, because complex 1 is gene was knocked out. So NADH concentration increases because it doesn't get oxidized. Because of NAMPT gene, because it is known to increase the NAD synthesis, the pool size increases. NADH NAD pool size increases. So both are present in one mouse. So these are the results that you see from such mice. The bottom one is for the wild type, and the top one is for the double gene. One is knocked out, and the transgenic mice. So you see both the ratio changing as well as pool size of NAD changing for these mouse. We have actually performed NMR experiments for human blood, and then identified all these coenzymes in whole blood, not in blood plasma, because you don't detect these metabolites of cellular energetics in plasma. In whole blood. However, you don't see coenzyme A and acetyl coenzyme A in blood. This is because more than 99% of the blood cells present in whole blood are red blood cells. Red blood cells don't have mitochondria in them. So we are currently working with collaborators to see the effect of drug on the levels of these coenzymes. I'm just moving on to one of the recent projects. This is monitoring cellular energetics in live systems in real time. In metabolomics, normally experiments are performed after extracting the metabolites from tissue or blood or whatever the samples, and then perform solution state NMR. The problem or the drawback of this approach is you will lose the opportunity to monitor dynamic changes in live systems in real time. One of the characteristics or advantages of NMR spectroscopy is that you can monitor metabolism in live biological systems such as cells, isolated organs, animal models, or even humans. Taking advantage of advances in NMR methodologies, we have investigated live isolated mitochondrial metabolism in real time. We have isolated mitochondria from C2, C12 cells. These cells are actually come from mouse muscle cells, because muscle cells have a lot of mitochondria in them, because if you do more work, you need more ATP. So it's because of that, heart, for example, heart is muscle cells. There's a lot of inside the cell, about more than 40% of the cell contain mitochondria. So there's a lot of mitochondria in them. So we use muscle cells to isolate mitochondria, and then these mitochondria were taken in an NMR tube. We used 13C labeled pyruvate as a substrate to monitor metabolism, pyruvate metabolism in mitochondria. And then we obtained a NMR data. Every 5 minutes, we obtained a 2D NMR spectrum. So what you see here is a 2D NMR spectrum obtained 10 minutes after addition of pyruvate into the mitochondria sample. This is an example, typical 2D NMR spectrum obtained after 40 minutes. Actually, we obtained every 5 minutes. So what I'm showing here is one in 10 minutes and another one 40 minutes. So the peaks that you see all come from the metabolism of pyruvate inside the mitochondria, 13C labeled pyruvate inside the mitochondria. So we have identified till now some of the many metabolites, and many still are unidentified. So if the concentration of the compound increases, the peak intensity increases, and vice versa, of course. For example, you see here, this is for alanine, which is a tiny peak in 10 minutes, and then it grows big in 40 minutes. Similarly, for lactate, which is tiny in 10 minutes after the addition of pyruvate, and it grows big in 40 minutes. Whereas this one is pyruvate, it grows, it becomes smaller because this is a substrate that we have used. It gets used up to form other metabolites. So we have measured the concentrations of all these metabolites. So these are typical time course for some of the metabolites.
Professor Gaura, can you wrap up in 5 minutes?
Okay, I'm done in 2 minutes.
Okay.
So this is the pyruvate, which decreases in intensity because this is used as a substrate. Whereas these are some interesting observations that lactate and alanine are synthesized in the mitochondria because this phenomenon of synthesis of these metabolites is new. We have also performed experiments using inhibitors, FCCP and rotenone. FCCP is known to increase disrupt mitochondrial membrane. Rotenone is known to disrupt mitochondrial respiration. These are just expansions of those graphs. These are point arrow indicates the point at which these inhibitors were added. As you can see, FCCP increases respiration, increases oxygen consumption, or rotenone, it disrupts the respiration. This is somewhat similar to the Seahorse mitochondrial respiration chain. In fact, we did these experiments without the oxygenation because we measured the oxygen. This was something like this. And then slowly it decreases. This is the point at which pyruvate was added. So within 15 minutes, oxygen becomes zero. So we have now recently developed a method to oxygenate the cell by passing oxygen through a silastic tube, gas permeable silastic tube. So this was the oxygen level measured before addition of pyruvate. It goes to zero. And then after passing oxygen, so it gets oxygenated. So we think that whatever the experiment we have done, most of the observations that we have obtained is obtained in the anaerobic conditions. So we are now in the process of performing experiment using oxygenation of the cells. So in summary, we just present our efforts to develop NMR spectroscopy methods for analysis of the coenzymes of cellular energetics. So these coenzymes are unstable. They are very sensitive to harvesting, extraction, and measurement conditions. And then each type of biological samples needs separate protocol. So we're working on different methods and protocols to address and understand various factors that impart instability to these metabolites. So we're also working on investigation of metabolism in live cells and mitochondria, which provide information about unknown metabolic pathway in the cellular energetics. I'd like to thank people associated with these studies. And then finally, I'd like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Gaura. That was a fascinating talk, especially some of the things that you are doing in real time and the oxygen studies. Absolutely fascinating. And also the new compounds that you guys are identifying from blood. Very, very good. There are a few questions, particularly about the methods. People want to know how the experiments are done. So one of the questions is, how do you process blood before recording the one proton NMR?
Oh, okay. The whole blood has cells, red blood cells mostly. And then of course, there's a lot of protein in it. We add organic solvents, but our optimal to use a combination of methanol and chloroform. Particularly, people normally use chloroform, methanol in metabolomics, but we found that in addition to adding chloroform helped arresting particularly these unstable metabolites. So if you add the solvents, they get solidified. All these metabolites are extracted into the solution, particularly the aqueous layer. It forms two layers, chloroform layer and then aqueous layer. So aqueous metabolites stay in the aqueous layer, and then lipid metabolites stay in the lipid layer. So in these particular experiments, we are not interested in what goes inside the chloroform layer. So take the aqueous layer and then remove the solvent by drying. Again, I just mentioned that drying affects these stability of these coenzymes. So you have to use some mild drying using nitrogen gas to make them, to keep the integrity of these coenzymes. And then dissolve the dried residue in a buffer for that is suitable for NMR measurements to get the data.
Your friend Professor Surya Prakash has asked, the number of metabolites in human blood should differ from every human being and also for each person when we take at different times. So how can we generalize this?
That is an interesting thing. If you obtain a blood NMR spectrum, me or anybody in the world, even if I give that one to an NMR expert, he will not say which one comes from which blood. I mean, it's literally, you'll say almost all the peaks in every human being, more or less in the same intensity ratios. So when in disease and healthy, some changes in concentrations happen. So far, in the blood, identification of new ones by NMR particularly has not happened because of its concentration threshold, sensitivity threshold. So you can't distinguish between one person's. In summary, you can't distinguish between blood spectrum from one person to another. So it will be almost identical, all human blood NMR spectra.
The other question is, without using 2D NMR experiments, just by using genomics and literature, are these sufficient for identification of new compounds?
Absolutely not. We know that NMR is sensitive to temperature, solvent that you use, concentration. So literature, of course, will give you some idea as a starting point, but ultimately you have to have other support like 2D NMR, ultimately spiking. So because that will compensate all other effects to positively identify a known compound.
One more question is whether unstable metabolites can be assessed in spent media.
Can I please repeat that again?
Whether unstable metabolites can be assessed in spent media.
Can be assessed in spent media?
Assessed, I mean, can they be measured?
Oh, in spent media? Oh,
Yeah.
What is the meaning of spent media?
I
Oh
have
yeah,
no clue.
okay. In the cellular medium.
Maybe. I
Okay,
don't
in
understand.
spent media. Actually, these are these metabolites. They stay inside the cells. This is what I said. In the blood, for example, you will not see these compounds in the plasma. Plasma is like a watery kind of thing. They are inside the cells. They are in the red blood cells. They don't come out of it. They'll come out of it if there is a lysis in the cells. If the blood is hemolyzed, maybe they just break out, and then you'll see in the liquid part of the medium. And the same thing would happen in the cells. So you're not expected to see these metabolites in the spent medium.
Okay, one last question. In optimal conditions, how many maximum number of metabolites can be detected from one sample using 1D NMR?
For blood, I said it's about 80. Currently, that's the highest by 1D NMR. But for tissue, the number varies from one type of sample to another type. Right now, it's about 80 to maybe you can maximum about 100. That is the range of metabolites that you can detect by 1D NMR.
Okay, let's all thank Professor Gora for a wonderful talk. So you can stop sharing slide now, and Vivek can start from where he left off. And of course, both the speakers will be around after the talk. Please stay back. If somebody has any discussions, we can have it. Okay, Vivek, you can start.
How do I unshare it?
You can stop share from your or you can stop video. But anyway, it doesn't matter right now. I can share my video, right? I mean, my screen is visible.
One participant. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Okay. So I'm really sorry, everyone. I'll just try to quickly wrap it up. I don't know what was the issue though. So I'll continue from the place where I left. I was moving on to my the second part of my first objective, where I'm trying to understand the structural or the vascular changes that may happen with age, and particularly related with the small vessel diseases. So as I told that since there was corona pandemic, and then I tried to leverage the data from NACC, which is an open source database. So I collected images from there and I did my analysis. So I will make it short and crisp. So the whole idea is to understand that how does these small vessel diseases affect the cognitive performance of the individuals. So what I did, I took the individuals who all were cognitively impaired and the individuals that were recognized as healthy volunteers. So what was the WMH volume load between these two? So it was very much evident that the WMH hyperintensity volume was lower in the healthy volunteers compared to the cognitively impaired subjects. But we know that all the cognitive impairments are not Alzheimer's. So there are cognitive impaired subjects without AD, and there are cognitively impaired subjects with Alzheimer's disease. So the whole idea is to can we come up to a stage which, by using these small vessel disorders or the vascular impairments, to comment that if the dementia is with AD or without AD, and how different it is from the mild cognitive impairments or the healthy volunteers. But when I tried to do the meta-analysis between the cognitively impaired and cognitively impaired subjects with AD compared to healthy volunteer, indeed the WMH load was actually lower in the healthy volunteer subjects across all the age, but there was no significant difference between the cognitively impaired subjects and the subjects who had cognitive impairment with AD. So, okay, this was quite disappointing a little bit, that WMH is not able to actually delineate the cognitive impaired subjects with the cognitive impaired subjects with AD. So then what I thought, so since NACC data has done extensive analysis, so a lot of information is available, and there are certain, I went back to my basic biochemistry and did the literature survey, and I found that there are certain apolipoproteins, which we all know. The job of apolipoproteins are to clear the cholesterol from the bloodstream. So, and we all have different kind of apolipoprotein E alleles. So some of the alleles can be E1, there the isoforms are E3, E3, or the E2, where the isoforms are E3 and E4, and let's say ApoE4, where the isoforms are E4, E4. And there was a very seminal paper in the Neurons. It says that the apolipoprotein E4, E4 alleles pose more risk towards acquiring AD as a consequence of aging. So I tried to see that what is the distribution of these apolipoproteins across these subjects, and indeed I'll just focus on the major result here, that indeed I see that almost 70% of the subjects who had cognitive impairment with AD had the apolipoprotein genotype as E4, E4, followed by the presence of one E4 allele. So almost 47% of the subjects who had at least one E4 allele had cognitive impairment with AD. Whereas 70%, around 68.4% subjects were healthy volunteers who had the genotype of E2 alleles. So it was very much in synchrony with what the biochemical results have shown, that E2 has a protective role, whereas E4 is known to pose cognitive risk, and it is indeed seen here that almost 70% subjects who had E4 had cognitive impairment with AD. So this gave me a clue that why not to see the WMH now in terms of the ApoE4 allele information. So what I found that, I'll just focus here, the subjects who had ApoE genotype as E4 allele, indeed the WMH volume load was high in the subjects who had cognitive impairment with AD compared to the subjects who had only cognitive impairment and the healthy volunteers. So this was this is quite interesting study, that now what we can do is like we can combine the genetic or genotypic information together with your MRI findings and then build a model which has strong predictive capacity to suggest about the trajectory of the aging, whether it is going towards the cognitive impairment or cognitive impairment with AD. The work is in the progress, and maybe in the coming time I'll have that model built up, and I'm actually working on that. So to summarize this part, as I showed that we are doing study in Indian cohorts. There are two cohorts, cohort 1 and 2, and each cohort has different characteristic. So one of the cohorts showed increased hippocampal decline rate compared to the other cohort, which is called SANSCOP cohort or cohort 2, whereas the WMS load was present at very early age in one of the cohort compared to the other one, but the other cohort showed very rapid increase in the WMS with increase in the age. And from the NACC data, I found out that the combination of apolipoprotein E4 allele is predisposing, and it is providing a risk for high WMS load, and it is able to distinguish a cognitively impaired subjects from the cognitively impaired subjects with AD. So the model will be ready. I'm working on a deep learning based model, and I'm trying to incorporate the ApoE information and the MRI information. I'll quickly move on to the second and the final work that is we are conducting, and these are the preliminary findings. So we all know that when you go onto the clinical scanners which are in the hospitals, mainly the MR spectroscopy which is being performed to get the metabolic information is basically the conventional MR spectroscopy. What do I mean by that? I mean, this is a radio frequency pulse designed as for press sequence, which is 90, 180, 180. And you can see that from the time of excitation to the time of acquisition is called echo time. And this echo time is divided into two sub echo times, T1 and T2. In the conventional setup, what is done that they try to keep the echo time very short. Right. So what happens when you do the short T spectroscopy, you get some spectra something like this. But and where you can see only metabolites like Na, creatine, and choline. But we as neuroscientists or the psychiatrists or the clinicians, we want to know what is happening to the important neurometabolites or the metabolites which are participating in metabolism, like GABA, glycine, glutamate, glutamine, glutathione, but these are actually masked because of the spectral overlap arising from the short TE, and also there is macromolecular contaminations. So the short TE is basically not an answer to get the clinically relevant information of the metabolites. So I'll quickly check one basic here, that we all know that there is a phenomenon of J coupling, and the metabolites or the molecules with the coupling that are strongly coupled shows variation in the spectral strength and the pattern when you try to vary their echo time. So why we can discuss it later. But let's say this is an N-acetyl aspartate. So there is a methyl group which is isolated, but here you have CH2 and CH group where the coupling phenomenon is seen. So if I try to change the echo time, if I vary one of the echo time, you can see that the signal strength is going down with time for the methyl group signal, which is isolated, not coupled. But when you see for the CH2 and CH, where the multiplets are arising because of the coupling, but when you change this echo time, at least one echo time if you are changing T2, you can see the signal strength and the pattern is changing. So this strategy I'm using to actually tailor my MRS sequences, so that let's say if I'm interested in delineating glutamate and glutamine or the N-acetyl aspartate, I can tailor my own sequences. So basically, I have done tailoring of some of my sequence by using numerical simulations and the density matrix simulations. I'll not go into the detail, but this is one of the method that I have implemented on few of the healthy volunteers. This is a chemical shift imaging, and the press TE was actually optimized for the better separation of glutamate, glutamine, and NAAG molecule. So here, this is a phantom you can see here. This is glutamate and well separated from glutamine. So glutamate around 2.35 and glutamine around 2.42 ppm. So if you see here, so this is an in vivo data coming from a healthy volunteer acquired with my tailored MRS method or parameters. I'm not going into the details of that, considering the time limitation, but if you see here, there is NAA, but in addition, there is a hump here, which can be seen. So basically, this is the signal coming from the NAAG. So I did this analysis across several healthy volunteers, and I was interested in analyzing NAG, NA, and the glutamate-glutamine distribution across the brain. But this was something interesting that I want to share here. So if you see, this is NA peak, the black one, and the blue one is basically the total NAA, and underneath there is NAAG peak. So since NAG is a coupled molecule, if you vary the echo time, I'm not showing the echo time information since it is not a published study. So if you try to vary the echo time, you can see that how the signal strength of the red you can change with variation in the echo time. So I selected one combination of the echo time so that I can easily differentiate NAG from the NA molecule. And then I applied it in the healthy brain. So this is the data coming from a healthy brain where the gray matter segmentation was performed, and the voxel was placed here in the gray matter region, and the voxel was placed only in the pure white matter region. So this is pure white matter without hyperintensity. So this is not a lesion. And if you can see, this data shows that the NA was 7.8 millimolar, let's say in the gray matter region, and the NAG was 0.9 millimolar. But if you see the analysis from the white matter region, you see like the NAG is actually 3 millimolar, almost 3 times higher than what it is seen in the gray matter. And I created a map, a metabolic map. So you can see the glutamate distribution is very high across the gray matter, whereas in the white matter it is variable. I mean, it is lower in the concentration. If you see the glutamine, it is also slightly more into the in the gray matter region, but NAG showed different pattern. Actually, NAG, you can see this is, so if you try to see this brain, this is the white matter part, and you can see here the white matter part shows high NAG concentration on both the sides of the white matter. So suggesting that so NAG is actually high in the white matter, whereas glutamate and glutamine are actually high in the gray matter. So this is something very interesting that I see when we are seeing actually at the white matter hyperintensity disorder. So we don't know, no one has shown till date that what is happening into the metabolic profile of these white matter hyperintensity lesions, and can we calculate these metabolic markers in these lesions, and can they act as a predictor of, and they add value to my prediction model where I'm trying to delineate a cognitively impaired subject with a cognitively impaired subject with AD from a healthy volunteer. So this study is actually being carried, like I'm doing across several subjects once the corona thing subsides and we start recruiting the subjects. So to just summarize this part, we developed a MRS method which is very sensitive for detection of the NAG, glutamate and glutamine. And glutamate shows distribution across the gray and white matter region, while NAG showed high concentration in the white matter. And we are further combining our metabolic and the structural data with the continuous blood flow analysis, so as to see the neurovascular and neurometabolic coupling and their role in the WMH pathologies. So I'll take this opportunity to thank this whole big team at CPR, where everybody is working in coordination, and this is a large cohort study, first of its kind in India, which is being led by Professor Vijay Lakshmi Ravinath, who is the director of Center for Brain Research. And there's a big team of clinicians and the basic scientists that are involved, and several institutes like NIMHANS and other medical colleges are involved in making this study possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vivek. That is a wonderful, wonderful talk. Very nice and interesting findings. You have a lot of questions about your interesting data. So I'll start off by a question, which is, there's a significant deviation in the volume versus age in both gray matter and hippocampal volume. While it could be a genotypic variation, won't it be a good idea to use identical twins for such studies in both cohorts, particularly for more accurate estimations?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, actually. Yes, and basically the identical twinning is the concept that is now picking up in the MR field, that to really understand what is happening, how does the genotype, phenotype, and the structure correlations are happening. Yes, indeed, Mandar, we are doing this study, and we are actually doing the whole genome sequence analysis for each subject who is undergoing MRI is having actually the whole genome sequencing. So I cannot reveal the data as of now, but yes, indeed, we are doing that genomic analysis, and someday we'll have a very good correlate between, was it actually the genomic status that was responsible for early onset of the white matter hyperintensity in one cohort, whereas the other cohort did not show the early onset of the WMH. Yes, probably it's very much true, and I think so, as I gave an example like apolipoproteins. So basically that whole genome sequencing analysis was a part of NACC study, and I leveraged the data and I found out. So basically the ApoE was playing some role in high WMH load in one population, like cognitively impaired with AD, then cognitively only the subjects with cognitive impairment. So I think that's a very beautiful question that you have asked, and actually the training idea is very nice, and yes, indeed we are thinking on those lines.
Grace has asked, how does the WMH in your cohorts compare with the standard database values? Other parameters, any other parameters have you compared?
I cannot see the question, but can you come again? So how is the WMH load compared to the values in other cohorts or something like that?
In compare with the standard database values.
Right, yeah, so that's a good question. So yes, I was also interested that how do the Indian population have high WMH load, or where is it actually ranging in terms of the world population? So as I showed NACC data, for a confluent grade 3 WMH, the maximum WMH volume was around 8 to 10 ml. And in fact, in our study too, I find like it was somewhere between 7 to 11 ml, and that is actually very much in consistency with what the NACC people showed. But I'm also working on the ADNI data, which is an Alzheimer's disease neuroimaging initiative, and I'm putting all those study. But my preliminary analysis suggests that there is no significant variation in the WMH in the Indian population compared to the other cohorts.
Albert is asking, first he says, nice talk. Then he is asking, from DTI to DWI, what you see is an averaged effect of extracellular and intercellular ADC. How do you separate the two from the DTI data?
Yeah, so basically, Professor Thomas, there is a mathematical modeling group that worked on the SMT analysis. So basically, it was a DTI 20 direction DTI data that was used actually with the deep learning model that is developed by University of Pittsburgh. In collaboration with them, so the SMT analysis was performed to basically just monitor the perpendicular flow of the motion, which is basically the motion prevalent in the extracellular media. And for the intracellular, along the direction of the fiber movement was actually modeled.
There's another question. In one of your initial slides, periventricular white matter showed different starting points, like 40% and 80%. Shouldn't they be the same?
So I think it was what I showed there, to be very precise and clear, that I showed the prevalence of the white matter hyperintensity in 2 cohorts. So cohort 1 and cohort 2, if I get your questions correctly, you can ask me again. So cohort 2 showed high prevalence of so high prevalence means it can be grade 1, grade 2 or grade 3. I just took all the subjects who had observable WMH and I put them as 1, let's say. So, and the one that did not show. So basically the cohort 2, I'm not grading them 1, 2, 3, but if there is a dot present, I took them as there is a WMH present. So basically the cohort 2 had observable WMH almost in the 80% of the subjects that were recruited at the very early age group of 45 to 64, compared to it was only around 20% or around 40% in the cohort 1, which was basically a cosmopolitan population. So it's just sum of 8 over the total population. Yeah.
Okay. The other question is, no, actually there are no more questions. It's a comment. It says very useful talk of 1D NMR and brain imaging. That's for both the speakers today. And Albert says thanks. He's happy with your explanation. So
I'm really sorry for that mess up that I am unable to figure out why it happened, but yeah, I'm sorry everyone. I'm running into your dinner time or somebody's office time. Yeah.
Well, that's laptops and not NMR machines, so they often malfunction. So thank you all for joining in. May I please share the screen which shows the next talks that are coming up in this series. 2 very interesting talks, very, very exciting talks. But Jeet and Surya Prakash, I can't share because I'm not the host.
Oh, you can share it.
Rana,
I think you have been given access. Arjit can
Share
share.
Rana, because you are a co-host, so.
You are a co-host. We have made you co-host.
It's still saying.
Otherwise, Jeet can share. Jeet, do you have the slide?
Yeah, I have it. I'll
Can you please share it?
Can you please share it?
Yes.
Yes, so next Tuesday, 25th August, two very, very exciting talks by Professor Dr. Sulakshana Mukherjee and Dr. Grace Kristirani. Sulakshana is a faculty at the Institute of Technology, Roorkee, and Grace is positioned in the St. Jude's Children's Hospital, Research Hospital, Memphis, Tennessee. So we hope to see you all next week for a very exciting continuation of the series of talks organized by NMRS. Okay, over to you, Surya Prakash.
Okay. Thank you, Rana, for conducting this. And we'll meet again next week. Thanks all of you for being present. Thank you.